Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to our online conference. We are all struggling with the same things at the moment, the corona crisis, and we would like to talk today about how we can offer assistance, how we can work together, and what are the learnings that we need to do and practice in order to get through this all together, this horrible unknown crisis that we're currently in. We have here customers from Lufthansa Systems today. I'm happy that we have a lot of airlines joining us today, as well other guests, so welcome everyone. The format of this event, we will have a talk by our two speakers today. We have Dr. Toni Reitz on the Skype call today, and we also have Mr. Jörg Franzl joining us today to talk about what airlines can do, even airports can do to come together to prepare themselves for maybe a longer pause in business, hibernation, revival, and how they can get through this all together. This session will be recorded, and we will be providing this on our website after the session. So if you would like to see it, you can download it or watch it on the website. And to summarize what we're going to be talking about today, the hibernation that companies need to go in, how to survive and how to restart when the crisis starts abating and business starts getting back to normal, to how to prepare yourself for that. So we will have two speeches with a presentation or with a PowerPoint, and then we will have a Q&A session, which will be roughly half an hour. During the time of the Q&A session, you could ask questions in the chat. We have put all of the audience on mute for now so that we don't have any background noise, but feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will be opening up the chat session about half an hour into the session, right before it starts. So get your questions ready and feel free to write them down. As a brief introduction to the speakers, we have Dr. Toni Reitz on board, and Dr. Reitz is the head of Lufthansa Systems Airline Consulting for EMEA, which means rest of the world, everything not Germany and the DACH countries, and head of the Global Management Consulting team. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Reitz, as an initial question. You entered the Lufthansa Group 30 years ago. You've seen many crises, including the financial crisis, the volcanic eruption in Iceland, which shut down air travel, 9/11, of course. What for you is the most relevant difference between this crisis and the other crises?
This situation right now for me was a big learning and is a big learning and is a big difference to what I knew in the past. Before I entered Lufthansa, I had been working as a physicist, making thoughts about theoretical nuclear things and all these. And in the airline world, I had first to learn what a crisis is, what this really means, that something happens and just things do not go on as regular as we are used to. But all of these situations had one thing in common. They were very strong interruption of our normal business life, partially also our normal social life. But always it could be foreseen that they had an end, and the situation after the crisis more or less returned to normal. When you think about the volcano eruption, this picture was perfect. Yeah, there was a certain problematic situation, but when it was over, the air was clean again, everything was fine. It was almost like this also for the financial crisis some years ago, for the SARS situation, for 9/11, for almost always we returned more or less to a situation like it was before. This is what cannot be foreseen today. Neither do we know how long this extremely problematic, this extremely threatening situation for airlines, how long this situation will last, and what the world afterwards will be. We have been used to live in a world of globalization. In order to cope with the crisis, now most states have to take a cellularization strategy, bringing the world apart again and isolating themselves in small, tiny cells in order not to proliferate the infection or minimize the proliferation. How the world afterwards will be again, if it will be again globalized like we knew it, or will it be something different, more something like an aggregate of cells with still very strong boundaries? We do not know. But in particular for the travel and transport industry, and in particular for airlines, this will determine how the future will be, and this will also determine if airlines, like we knew them, if they still have the means and the ground and the reason to exist. And that is for me the main difference.
Thank you. I'd like to now take a moment to introduce Jörg Franzl. Jörg is the director of the Lufthansa Systems Airline Consulting Management Team. Mr. Franzl, are there already some learnings that you see out of this crisis in terms of airlines and how they are able to respond and adapt and position themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hello everybody from my side. Definitely I would like to add some things to what Dr. Reitz has mentioned already. I personally, and I believe most of us, have never experienced such a crisis before in such a manner. We don't know how it ends, where it will lead us to. And I could not even imagine that such a crisis will ever happen. However, I'm not here to give you good recommendations, but more sharing some of the observations I made personally, and maybe we can exchange on that a little bit more. There are 2 or 3 fundamental things and features which we see as essential, at least to manage this crisis and to look beyond this crisis. The one thing which I definitely observe is the necessity of working remotely. As we all know, we all of a sudden changed our way of collaboration, and we were forced to work remotely, completely shut down, forced us to work remotely, and this is completely new for us. Just imagine 2, 3, 4 years ago, I would say that would have been nearly impossible to manage this. And this brings me to the next point, the necessity of a good IT environment. Also, this is, I think, fundamental. And of course, there are 2 or 3 roles which we also would like to point out, and maybe Mr. Dr. Reitz, he would like to say a few words on the roles.
Yes, I can. One thing is that it is, even if we do not know what this crisis will lead to, we can recognize very clearly that there will be 3 phases in which we have to cope with the crisis. One is the first one, this is this shock. There is no demand anymore, no possibility to keep up the airline networks, and to respond by really coming down, hibernating, putting most functions of an airline into sleep. Then there will be a long phase of we do not know what. We will have to survive in this phase, keeping means and organizations ready. And then at some point in time, a restart phase will, hopefully sooner, will begin. We will describe our thoughts, what is important in all these phases later on. But it is not only to understand what the phases and the tasks in these phases will be, which we will comment later, but it's also to understand what kind of attitudes are important. Our action is about facts and about attitudes. And there are, in my view, two major attitudes you need. You have to manage the crisis and you have to find structure. And this gives a hint for the two most important roles that we might have. The role of a kind of crisis manager and the role of some kind of engineer who helps then to build the structures we can rely on so that we can survive and restart. And perhaps, I know you are much about these kind of game of attitudes and person and characteristics. Perhaps you can give some detailed comments on these major roles.
Of course, I would like to, yes. And adding to what you said, these two major roles, which are definitely essential for this crisis and to manage this crisis, we also spoke and will speak about the procedures. So I mentioned that already, distributed collaboration and iterative decision making, which is more essential than ever before, brings us also to a key fundament of how do we manage this what is the right structure. And let me try to talk a little bit before I come back to the procedures about the role of the crisis manager. Many people asked me and while we were preparing this talk today, we were talking about what is the role of a crisis manager actually? What is the key or the core feature of the personality? What might be the right attitude? And that is definitely not that easy to define. I can only share with you my understanding of what gives me confidence. That is actually the key aspect I'm looking at. Definitely a crisis manager always have to stay in front end of the reality. So he's the one who has to stay in front, give stability and transparency. That's not always that easy, but we all have more faith and trust in someone if he gives us a clear stability in this crisis. He should be calm and decisive. So we expect him to manage this in a calm manner, but also make decisions. And sometimes he has to listen to unpopular advices, and he definitely needs to take risk in the face of risk, which is all easy to say, but it is not that easy to execute. I personally believe that he needs to have a charismatic and also convincing manner. And maybe we look a little bit more deeper into the three phases Dr. Reitz has mentioned, and speak a little bit about this hibernate phase, survive phase, and restart phase, and how those roles have to interact in these phases. Dr. Reitz, would you like to?
I can easily do, and this now would be the other role, the role of the engineer, who is not a political leader, not going forward with charisma, but just calmly structuring things and analyzing things. And in my belief, we will have three very, very clear phases. The first is, as I said, we have to hibernate. There is no demand, or almost no demand, in many of the markets. There are almost no international flights. In the big nations, even national flights are strongly reduced. So we cannot just carry on, but we have to go to sleep. We have to shut down most parts of our networks. But it's of utmost importance. It is essential. This is an orderly retreat. It is not meaningful just to shut down the network and then hoping things will be better. It has to be an orderly retreat and not just only a quick getaway. I give you an example why out of everyday's life. I'm a single father of 2 boys, and so often I have to prepare the food in the evening. And afterwards I'm often tired and do not like to make up the kitchen afterwards. If I just leave the kitchen and go to sleep, and then in the next morning, the catastrophe is there. How can I work here? How can I begin the next day? If I just take 10 minutes to bring everything in order again, then the start in the next morning is quite easier. And it's the very same for airlines now in this situation. If you are able to orderly reduce your activities, then you are in a far better position to start again. For example, the fleet, most of the fleet has to be grounded, that is clear, and quickly to be grounded in order that cost does not explode. But you have to do it in such a way that you can reactivate the fleet as you need. You do not know the restart plan yet, but you have to be able to reactivate your fleet according to any restart plan, which might be reasonable. So think about, what do you do with the aircraft? What do you do with the soldiers? What is the quickest way to be up in the air again? The same is with your staff. Of course, it is extremely effective just to lay off whom you can lay off. But what is then afterwards? When you start again and do not have a core of qualified staff, you run into the problem of staffing, of training, of licensing, and so on. So that even if you reduce your staff now, you have already to think about what is happening when I want to go into business again. And the same is for customer relations. You cannot, after a crisis, just expect to fly to the cities you flew in the past and there will be the demand again. If your customers lost trust in you in the situation of crisis, it will be extremely difficult to regain. And therefore, the bottom line of this hibernation phase is, it is the phase in which you can make the most massive losses. If you are not quick enough, you will make financial losses, for the cost is going on. So we have to bring costs down by the means of a crisis manager as quickly as possible. But also, you have to think about the way you are able to restart. The manner you leave is the manner you come in again.
And maybe I can add a few words to that. Specifically, as you mentioned, it is now very crucial to look, how do I have to replace myself as an airline after the crisis, and what do I have to do with my assets and all these things. But we find that it's very crucial now, the role of the network planner modulate scenarios. The more scenarios you have, the more capability you can look at. What does that mean actually for me? Have a discussion based on how to structure your business and your fleet actually. So that is definitely one of the crucial topics you need to look at the moment. Another thing is, of course, operations. What we doing here in the Lufthansa environment, operations at the moment has much more to do. Somehow has a higher workload. However, they need to ensure that the workforce is there, and then that they can provide a business continuity. So what they are currently thinking of and have established is actually a two-tier structure. They have a core team sitting as a decision-making team in the ops control center, and need to enable people around them, the experts, to deliver the right content. So these are things you definitely have to look at the moment.
I very much like what you said. for this already gives a hint about what is happening in the survival phase. In the survival phase, you cannot just sit down there and wait. Of course, you have to just to maintain operational readiness. But you have, as you said, already two big tasks. First is strategic reassessment. You have already to think about what will the position of my airline be in the future? What will the kind of business be in the future? The airline world will be different. There will be completely different demand from today. And you must already generate the ideas and the strategies. What to do then? You will not be able to just restart your old network. You will have to create a new one. And the same is in this time of survival, or in this time of crisis. We learned to work in a different way. As you said, layered activities, only having core teams in the OCCs doing many things in a remote and different way. The question also there will be, what will be our operational structure afterwards? And it can be that it will be much, much different from that what we knew today, a big OCC or everybody sitting together. It can be that we will do it in a completely different way afterwards. And these are the two major tasks of this middle phase of this survival phase. Find your new strategy to the markets and find your new way to set up your internal structures to work effectively after the crisis is over.
Exactly, and have a real closer look onto the structural changes you have made due to the crisis, which you might take beyond, because there are also optimizations already. So these are definitely crucial activities you have to do.
I completely agree. For the pressure from the market, the pressure from the other airlines will be much more. We cannot guarantee that there will be as much demand as there is today. Competition will be fierce in a way that we do not yet know today, or just many airlines will just be off the market. And therefore, then after the survival phase, then really the big task starts. You will be like in a swimming pool, in a pool full of sharks. And you have to survive. You have to survive in this. Therefore, you have to cleverly prepare the new markets you fly to. You just cannot open up flights to a certain destination and then hope we have the time that we are able to stimulate demand. For in the phase of the crisis, even if you did utmost cost management, your financial means will almost be reduced to zero or even to negative values. Therefore, you cannot just try some destination and then we will have the money and wait. You must do the network restart in a manner that allows you immediately access to revenues, so that you can cover your cost from the very beginning, for there will be no big means for investments left after this phase. The shutdown phase, you have to reduce costs, so liquidity is not just running away, but with the long time of the crisis, you will have to start with almost no financial buffer. And therefore, you have to, the restart has to be planned very, very cleverly. You have to secure the adequate operational resources from the first second, and you must already plan it before. You must be able to run the fleet with an extremely high aircraft utilization. For every second lost is money lost you do not have in this time. All money will be burned. And of course, you have to have a clear strategy then how to step by step also fill your rank and files again. Properly licensed in the necessary strength and loyal again to the company. For only the loyalty of your customers and the loyalty of your people will secure the future business. These are the challenges of the third phase, in my opinion.
Yeah, I fully agree. And there are two additional aspects I would like to point out, which comes somehow under procedures and very often seen as methods or methodologies. Over the last couple of years, all airlines actually are looking into agile transformation and how shall they do that? How does that help my business and so on? And innovation. So all these topics. I think those airlines who have done a lot of work in this direction, they have an advantage in the market. I mean, liquidity is a different object, of course, but if you have a structure which gives you at least the capability to come up with innovations and to work on innovations, because the question will be, how can I regain confidence in my customer? And that will not be normal models, normal pricing models. We will all make offers, of course, but we have to come up with ideas how to regain confidence. And there's a lot of innovation needed. And of course, the collaboration and the remote working as we experience in the moment. I would say there are a lot of components which I always see and teach people in the agile environment. So really have these daily stand-ups, reduce the complexity of organizational structures, minimize that the organizational depth in exchanging information and communication. I think these are advantages we are currently learning from this crisis, which definitely should also be thought about in the future.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree to this background, but we are offering, or we are able to share even more. Perhaps you might give some comments about the structure of our crisis consulting package and about the modules that we developed.
Of course. So basically, you see here already on the slides that we have 5 core areas we would like to discuss further with you. There's the area always of market and network, which is definitely key, as we mentioned it. So how do I establish and restructure most likely my market positioning and also my network? The next one is the ops environment, where I already mentioned the how do I provide this 2-tier structure, and this was something I've learned that the industry is talking about for many years, but never executed it well. Mm-hmm. Now they were forced to do that. Maybe this might be an interesting topic to discuss. Mm-hmm. How to do that? What are additional roles maybe you need to implement in an ops control center? Very important. CAMO, MRO, business continuity assessment. Mm-hmm. That's something I spoke with our expert. They say, well, there is a need to see how do I restart my business, of course. Mm-hmm. Also, liquidity is a topic. However, we are not so much influenced. We have much more work to do at the moment because the fleet is standing around and we need to maintain it and also is part of giving confidence to the customer. Mm-hmm. What is happening with all our fleets at the moment? How do we maintain them and so on? Customer experience stabilization and of course the confidence recovery, one of the major components, I believe, because again, we must make sure that the customers, and that's the big question, when is this crisis over? When do we really, and we are still in, and actually no one knows, are we still in the starting phase? We look at the numbers, it's incredible. I have no idea about how long this will go. So, but we need to start thinking of how do we convince and reconvince actually and get confidence in our product. What additional information might be needed? How do I tailor a product which definitely again gives confidence to the customers to fly with us again? And one additional and very important topic, we are all talking about that over the last years now, which becomes more and more important and critical, is actually cybersecurity at the moment. We're all working digital, as we know, and the question is what kind of threats are there, what kind of security enhancements we have to do and all things. So these actually are the 5 areas we like to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So we have these 5 modules of our crisis assistance package: network, operations, KMO and MRO, customer, and security. Exactly. And I'm sure Mrs. Weilatz will at the end explain how we offer deeper insight into each of these 5 packages in subsequent sessions. However, please allow me to make 1 or 2 additional comments about 2 special peculiarities. One is, in all past crises, we returned more or less to the situation as before, with some differences. Of course, after 9/11, we had a much higher level of security at the airports, more checks in the security area and so on. But it was more or less the same as before. But however, we do not know how long this pandemic will last. And it is very probable that the business ramp-up and the ramp-up of social activities will occur in a time when the pandemic still is there. So we will probably restart in a pandemic environment. What no of the airlines of the world had to do for a long time in the past. So this is one of the peculiarities we have to think about. And the other, indeed, is cybersecurity. Cyber criminals do not hibernate. On the contrary, they are using the present time where the attention of most people, also in IT, is to different topics. They use it already to infiltrate your IT today, to install the stubs there they can later on use to attack you, your data, and your processes. So these 2 things we have already all the time to think about. The restart will be a restart in a pandemic world, and care for your security, care in particular for your cybersecurity already today.
Thank you, Dr. Reitz, and also Mr. Franzl. If it would be a good time, I would like to switch over to the Q&A, and we could open the session. We have 74 participants on the call, so we have decided to keep the Q&A in the chat function and to have all of the participants muted, just so that we don't have too much background noise, as I said. If you would like to now start formulating questions and putting them into the chat, one of my colleagues will open up the Q&A chat, and then we can field them. All right. This will take a moment. I actually have a couple of questions for you to start off with. Mr. Franzl, maybe for you, what are the 3 things airlines absolutely must do now to just get through the survival phase, if there's only 3 things that you would recommend?
Well, as I said, I pretty much believe that we really have to look into the customer segment and to see what are the things we need to tailor to regain confidence in our product. That is one of the crucial topics definitely we need to do. And in parallel, definitely we also need to look at the market repositioning or positioning. So all the things around network and market is definitely something you have to look at. And the third thing is, all the structures, as we mentioned, which have been changed so far, may give us an opportunity to optimize our business and to keep them alive beyond the crisis. Mentioning the 2-tier strategy in ops is definitely something which is crucial to look at.
Okay, thank you.
I perhaps am allowed to add 1 sentence.
Of course.
And perhaps it is a summary of what Mr. Franzl said. My opinion is that we have to reinvent the passenger product of airlines. The cargo airline business, that will stabilize again as soon as the industries will regain strength. But the passenger product is in danger. There is a big threat that it will not exist in the future as it existed in the past.
All right, thank you. We mentioned before there are 2 roles that need to be looked at and filled during the crisis, the role of crisis manager and the role of engineer. obviously there must be more roles during hibernation that need to be filled to keep a company going and to keep a company afloat. Under a hibernated company structure for an airline, what are, in your opinion, the minimum functions that an airline has to maintain in terms of communication, any kind of minimum roles?
As I said, you need people who do the strategic reassessment. You need people really thinking about what is our position in the future. You need an operational core. You will have some minimum number of flights. So you will have some kind of core OCC, some kind of core operations, core management, and you have to maintain your brand. So you have to be visible. As soon as your brand is forgot, you are away. So these are the three things I think you have to do. You have to do the future-oriented strategic reassessment and also structural reassessment. You have to maintain an operational core, and you have to be visible in communication so that your brand still survives.
Thank you.
Maybe I can add some things. I fully agree what Dr. Reitz said. What I've learned just from listening as an employee of Lufthansa, of course, I think they have structured 3 crisis teams. I would definitely underline that this is a valuable approach. So you have in the first team, you have people who look at all the commercial and all the external costs, of course. How can I reduce that and as quick as possible? That is definitely a key question. So this is what they did and what they are still doing. And then, of course, as Dr. Reitz said, you need to look at the business. How do I guarantee, or let's name it guarantee, my business continuity? So in operations, still have things to do, of course, in daily ops. HR questions. My employees are very important, of course. The health of customer and employees is an important thing. So also communication will be in regards to customer and also internally. So, and then of course you have the third team. Doesn't have to be a separate team, but who is looking at the scenery beyond, as we said. So what do we need to do? How do we optimize things? Now we have the chance to optimize and restructure some areas. And how do we prepare ourselves for the future for a new product, as Dr. Reitz mentioned?
Thank you. We have a question from a customer here. What do you foresee happening in the regulatory environment, and how should airlines be engaging with regulators during the survival and restart phases?
Do you mean regulations in terms of, like in South America, the situations?
With regards to regulators, what kind of relationships do they need to be maintaining? Is there lobbying that needs to happen in order for governments to reopen? What do you suggest here?
I think the most important thing is to get away from this present fear-driven discussion, to enter into a mode where things are looked at in an extremely rational and structured way. And therefore, of course, lobbying with regard to governments is extremely important. For you have to act in line, you have to foresee what is happening. And therefore, I don't think it's as much the regulators, it's more the political environment. For this is driving the decisions today. And we have to help them to get away from this fear-driven mode into a rational mode, into a structured mode. And I think what is very important also for how we are looked at, how we are received at the market is to point out the roles that we as the airline communities can play in overcoming the crisis. Like we did today, we are maintaining a part of the global network so the global industries can work well. And this is what is important, that we are not just only seen as some kind of collateral damage of a crisis, but that we're seen as a part of this big force working together to solve the crisis. This is the most important thing. And I don't think it's so much in direction of the regulators, but more in the direction of politics and public and how we are seen in the public.
I have a follow-up question, which I think works nicely with that one. You're talking about confidence. Does the early bird catch the worm? How do you rate speed to market in terms of a restart phase? Does speed in this situation actually foster customer confidence? And if you would be quick to restart, what kind of stop gates would you need to put in, or what kind of procedures would you need to put in to have passengers actually feel good to fly with you again? In a pre-vaccine phase,
I would say that's a pretty good question, and it's a complex, definitely complex environment we are in. So the whole market is depending also on the decisions made by other countries. So we cannot actually act and say we fly there just because we want. We need to wait until what are the governments deciding, and which countries comes first and second and third. So this is a little bit the driver as well for our decisions. How do I make confidence, and is the early bird the one who's winning? That's a pretty difficult question to answer. It's always a question of time, but I would rather prefer to be honest and to rely on the things you know, instead of just going in a direction where is a huge uncertainty. So what I pretty much like is, which I saw, I think that was a South American CEO who went into the aircraft and explained how somehow, I would say safe, but what does the aircraft do in avoiding spreading the virus, for example, the air conditioning and so on. So we need to give a lot of information to the customers, maybe having fluids and things and masks on board, all these things. However, it is still depending on which state we are. So I know that in South America, it's just starting. Like we have now many more infections here in Europe, and somehow people believe that in Asia that has already been somehow it's mindering. I don't know. However, quick is not always the best way, but of course we always have to observe, and that also means we need to inspect and adapt. That is something I always recommend. So if you have a good team and a good structure, then you need to make decisions, and of course you need to start early, plan scenarios. So if you have a bunch of scenarios in hand, and based on that, and then looking at the context, you need to make your decisions. Not that easy, definitely not.
In the hibernate phase, it's very clear that the early bird wins. Shut down as quickly as you can in order to predict your liquidity and reduce your cost to the absolute minimum. In the survival phase, the early bird is winning. For the airline which starts early to think about the future market will be best positioned. In the third phase, I completely agree to you, Mr. Franzl. It depends. If you have the means, the financial assets to start early, you can try to do in certain markets where you are sure that you can stimulate demand quickly. But if you start too early in a certain region, you will again burn the money you do not yet have. And therefore, it's not just the early bird, but finding the right point in time in the right market. That will be the real art of war in this restart phase. Sorry for the comment.
I I appreciate very much the comment. We have another question here, which I think is a perfect segue, talking about the regional reopening of business among airlines. Do you have information about the ramp up, which is already happening in China, Japan, South Korea, for instance? Would it be possible to share lessons learned from these states, or is this a temporary reopening of business?
This depends on the health situation. For example, everybody thought that Singapore was an extremely stable country due to their early and clear procedures. Now they are running into trouble also. In China, we had hope once and the pandemic returned. Now we have hope the second time. And there is very big fear, and the probability is not zero, that there will be a third wave of the pandemic. Therefore, the most important thing, or the most important lesson to learn, is you have to be able to react. We do not know if this will be just then the last wave or the end of the crisis, or if it will return. Therefore, you have always to maintain, if there is a lesson learned, always leave you more than one way open and protect your liquidity. You must be financially able to act. These would be the most easy things I think we can learn, and the details we will know if that was really again restarting business, or if it was too early. We will know in 6 weeks or 8 weeks. It's too early to say. I hope for Asia that there is no additional wave of the pandemic there, and that the countries are coming to peace and to restful life again.
Okay, thank you.
And definitely one additional thing, we will see how the market will react. I think the customer will tell us actually, because even if we would start flying again, we will see how the people would be hesitant to fly at the moment, I would say. You can see that on the streets, how the people are behaving. Even in supermarkets, though, there's a lot of anxious, a lot of fear. So we, as Mr. Reitz said, we need to build the structure and the context as good as we can to be in the situation to act and react. The better we are positioned there and have scenarios in hand, the better we might start. I would not build our liquidity based on future business. We should really see how can we stay in stable mode as good as possible, and then start as quick as possible when we have good signals in the market.
And be aware, people will be full of fear. People will be full of fear, and that will make a big difference to today.
Mm-hmm. I have a commercial question to change the subject a little bit. You mentioned that selling and the customer product as such are very important to regain passengers and revenue. Where do you see these 2 points covered in the 5 domains listed on the right-hand side of the slide? So I mean in the restart part. How do you approach commercial activities in the restart phase?
It's part in the customer confidence recovery package. What are the kind of products we can offer, or what is the kind of product, like safe flying, but seen in a completely different way. We see it today. Maybe part of it, and of course the market oriented is a part of the network realignment package.
And maybe that will be also interesting to observe. Maybe the pricing discussion will be a different one. As we said, people have fear, and if they have confidence, they most likely, I don't want to speculate too much, but they would not look too much on pricing. It depends on the regions as well, don't get me wrong. But it is more, do you provide me much confidence in flying with you instead of having the cheapest price in the market?
Will there be, we have another regulations question. Will there be new regulations in your opinion after the crisis and the restart happens? And another follow-up question, assuming there might be a regulation required wearing masks, will airlines have to start providing them? Will they need to currently during the crisis when they are looking after their cash and their outputs already need to start manufacturing masks and look at this and look at mask vendors and things like that?
That's an interesting question. Actually, I was thinking about that as well. I'm not sure. I would say if this regulation will come up, we also, and this is also country specific, I would say, there is a discussion ongoing also in the various countries now, in every country. I just observed that in Germany now that the politics are discussing that with the industry and seeing how can we provide things which are essential. I wouldn't say that the airline later on has to or is obligated to buy those things. We will see how that regulation, where this will end. I would say if you have things in hand, you might be better positioned. So if you have such things like masks or liquids or whatever, but there's always a question of investment, of course, and I don't know how much mask we will then have to buy.
But we can sure. We do not know precisely what future regulations will be. Yeah. We can bet that you will have the question of protection against infection and disinfection and all that in the plane.
And that is definitely something which definitely enhance you or will change your product. That's exactly true. Yeah.
We may have a topic, the issue of social distancing in the plane, but even more in the airport. Most airport processes as we know them today, queue before security, won't work in a normal mode again in such a pandemic scenario. So we will have massive changes also in which kind of processes work. We cannot yet predict what will be the final structure of regulations. For presently, politicians and also medical people produce new ideas almost every day. But there will be something. There will be something about protection. There will be something about disinfection. There will be something about social distancing. So when you think about your future product, also include scenarios which look at these things.
But it's a business model.
What is unclear? How it will become is unclear, but it will come in some way.
But it's a business model in which people have to keep the middle seat free in first class, a viable business model for the future.
It may be a consequence which you cannot evade for a certain time. It may massively reduce the capacity of your aircraft.
For sure.
Yes, this may be. Perhaps you can compensate by using them in a hybrid mode, also with more belly freight than is possible today, maybe. But don't be sure that you can use the aircraft as they are configured today in the future. Social distancing will be a problem. It will perhaps not only be the middle seat, but will services like we know them of today, will they be possible for the passengers in aircraft in the future? This we do not know, but think about it. For we will have a pandemic world. It will be closer to what happens today in a supermarket than what happened in a plane in the past.
Yeah, fully agree. So that will definitely change your product. And coming back to what Dr. Reitz said about social distancing at airports and so on, you also will have to look at your digitalization strategy. The more you have automated and the more the people can use their mobiles and staying away from big crowds, most likely the faster the confidence will be back.
When I was hired at Lufthansa, my first boss told me the biggest competitor of Lufthansa is not Air France or British Airways, it is Deutsche Telekom. I did not believe that, and I always waited for this moment. It can be that now this moment has come that the biggest competitor for the airlines is the internet communication. full stop. Maybe that the mass transportation we knew in the past does not come back, at least in business life.
A follow-up question to this. It's going to be divisive because this is the situation. How do you see innovation in terms of offer to our customers and cybersecurity, etc., going in line with some airlines being partially or completely taken over by states? Isn't that going to rather slow down innovation?
Well, that's that
nationalization question. Yeah.
Of course, but the question at the moment is liquidity and keep alive, right, and be alive. So we all know that being a state-owned company, that is the last thing most likely we all want to be. But that's a decision which is definitely made on a very high level, and it's all depending on the liquidity, as I said. Definitely that will in many cases reduce innovation. And we spoke in Lufthansa as well about it, that the model being a state-owned company will be a completely different airline than we are today. That's for sure. And that doesn't drive innovation too much.
But nevertheless, the biggest inhibitor to innovation is bankruptcy.
Yeah.
If you are bankrupt, you do not innovate anymore.
Yeah.
So if the only way of survival for an industry is that the states or that the European community or whoever supports industries in this situation, I would not step back from it. I would not refrain from it only due to ideological reasons. This is a situation we never saw before. And it may be that it's just necessary that states or that communities support some industries, otherwise they will cease to exist due to bankruptcy. And this, then you do not need to talk about any innovation anymore.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left. Do you have any parting words or final statements that you would like to make before we close this meeting?
Maybe we can have a look at the last page we created, and we just tackled some of the topics, and we would like to offer further virtual discussions if you are up for it. And we have created already a sort of timeline when we want to talk about these topics. So network realignment, market repositioning, all these things. There will be more in May coming. And we are planning for the other months as well, as you can see. That is definitely something I would like to point out. And you can follow the actual date on social media. We will post it, and also on our website.
And I might also invite the participants. We still have 74 people on listening. To ask if you have any further questions for follow-up sessions or topics for follow-up sessions, please just drop them into the chat and we will do our best to accommodate with the further sessions.
I think not only with the further sessions, the questions we already have today, I think we will try as best as we can also to to answer them in written mode, and then perhaps if we can condense the most important question and to answer them and to publish the answers on our website and in our social media channels, so that no question also of today will be lost.
Perfect. That's great. Well, then I think
it will take some days, but we will do that. And in fact, we just set the scenery for the discussion with our customers today, and we would be very glad if we can continue it either by answering the question and also, as I saw this question right now, and also in a recurring series of these broadcasts going step by step through the packages, also with the help of our colleagues, which are now also shown in the presentation that Mr. Franz gives. So we will continue. We will return to this format and go through the steps of through the elements of the package step by step. And before this, we will answer all your questions in written and publish them.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation, for listening. Indeed, if you have anything else to add, then just add it. We will share. And we look forward to having you participate in another event in the future, in the near future. Thank you very much.
And stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.